The shadow denier. The most dangerous person is the one who pretends to be pure. Have you ever spoken to someone who seemed nice, polite, even morally upright, yet left you feeling strangely tense or uneasy? Maybe you couldn't pinpoint why, but something inside you whispered, "Something here isn't right." That's not paranoia, that's intuition. And Carl Jung would have told you, you've encountered someone who's deeply out of touch with their own darkness. Jung called it the shadow, the part of our psyche that contains everything we repress, deny, or avoid. Envy, anger, selfishness, manipulation, hidden lusts, unacknowledged fears. The shadow is the psychological attic where we shove everything that doesn't match the image we want to show the world. But what we repress doesn't disappear, it grows. The most dangerous people are not the ones who admit they're flawed. It's the ones who pretend they're not. Those who deny their shadow become unconscious agents of destruction, not because they're evil, but because they refuse to see what lives inside them. These are the moral purists, the self-righteous, the always offended, the gossipers who claim to stand for justice, the chronic finger-pointers who never take accountability. They live in a psychological illusion, projecting their inner chaos onto others. Jung warned that the human tendency to project our shadow onto the outside world is the root of most conflict, interpersonal, cultural, even political. When someone says, "I would never do something like that," you should be suspicious. Because if they truly knew themselves, they wouldn't be so certain. The integrated person, the one who has faced their own darkness, doesn't walk around pretending to be perfect. They're grounded, less reactive, more compassionate. They don't need to control or shame others. They've looked in the mirror and survived it. But the shadow denier, they don't just dislike people, they demonize them, they moralize instead of reflecting. And if you get too close, you'll start to feel like you're the problem. That's how their unconscious guilt spreads. Not inward, but outward. How can you recognize them? They speak in absolutes, always right, always wrong, always someone else's fault. They can't handle criticism. Even the gentlest feedback sparks defensiveness or outrage. They're addicted to drama, because if they stop long enough to reflect, the mask might slip. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's exactly what the shadow denier does. And the cost is paid by everyone around them. The danger isn't just in their words, it's in their emotional atmosphere. The pressure they exert on others to conform to their fragile self-image. You start censoring yourself, tiptoeing, doubting your instincts. That's when you know you're not in a relationship, you're inside someone else's psychological defense system. So what do? First, recognize your own shadow. If you know your inner darkness, it's harder for others to use it against you. The more honest you are with yourself, the less vulnerable you become to emotional manipulation. Second, distance yourself from those who moralize but never self-reflect. They are not safe. Not because they are bad people, but because they are asleep at the wheel of their own psyche. Jung believed that true power comes from self-awareness, from embracing the full spectrum of human emotion, even the ugly parts. The people who refuse to do that don't just lie to others, they lie to themselves. And anyone who lies to themselves is capable of anything. Avoid the shadow denier, not out of judgment but out of wisdom, because what they refuse to face within will inevitably spill out into the world around them. The eternal victim, when suffering becomes a weapon. They always have a story, a heartbreak, a betrayal, a series of unfair events that the world seems to have conspired against them. At first, your heart goes out to them. You want to help, you listen, you reassure. But Carl Jung would have warned you, be very careful, because when someone clings to the victim identity, they're not looking for healing, they're looking for control. There's a crucial distinction here. Real victims deserve compassion. Life can be cruel and everyone experiences pain, but the eternal victim, the person who refuses to take responsibility for their inner world, doesn't want to grow. They want to be rescued again and again. The victim archetype, when left unchecked, becomes one of the most draining and manipulative forces in human psychology. Why? Because it creates an emotional black hole. Your energy goes in, but nothing ever changes. The moment you try to empower them, they recoil. The moment you offer truth, they feel attacked, because their pain has become their power, and they're not ready to give it up. Jung believed that the psyche strives for wholeness, not helplessness. When someone over-identifies with being wronged, They split off the part of themselves that is capable, responsible, and empowered. They become incomplete by choice, and incomplete people often seek to complete themselves through others by outsourcing responsibility, by blaming, by demanding emotional labor from anyone who gets close. How can you tell you're dealing with an eternal victim? They take no ownership of patterns in their life. Every failed relationship, every conflict, every setback is someone else's fault. They react defensively to any suggestion of change. Growth feels like betrayal to them. They guilt you when you set boundaries. Suddenly, you're the bad guy for not being there enough. This person will weaponize vulnerability. They'll use sadness to control you, and the longer you stay in their orbit, the more you'll feel responsible for their emotional state. Sound familiar? Jung understood that helping someone isn't the same as carrying them. The moment your support becomes an emotional burden, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a rescue fantasy, and fantasies are not sustainable. One of the hardest truths is this: you can't save someone who benefits from staying broken. In fact, trying to save them only feeds the illusion that they are helpless, that they need others to function. And this is where it gets dangerous, for them and for you. They stay small, you become depleted, and the dynamic becomes a cycle of mutual self-destruction. So what do? You draw the line, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You say, I'm here for you, but I won't carry you. And if they rage, collapse, or manipulate, know that you've touched the part of them that doesn't want to grow. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But the eternal victim avoids that privilege, because becoming whole requires letting go of the story where they are always the one being hurt. Avoid this person, not because they're hopeless, but because they've chosen not to heal. And until they do, your empathy will be used against you. You don't owe anyone your peace, especially not someone who turns their pain into your prison. The charismatic manipulator, when charm becomes a weapon. They're magnetic, smooth. They look you in the eye, smile just right, say exactly what you needed to hear. They understand you, or at least they make you believe they do. You walk away thinking, finally, someone who gets me. But Carl Jung would urge caution, because when someone is too charming, it often means they've replaced authenticity with strategy. Enter the charismatic manipulator, a person who has mastered the art of emotional influence without ever revealing who they really are. These individuals aren't just likable, they're crafted. Their personality is an adaptive mask designed to reflect your desires, to disarm your defenses, to gain your trust, not through truth, but through performance. In Jungian terms, they've become completely identified with their persona, the socially acceptable version of themselves. And the danger? There's no self underneath, only the need to be admired, adored, or obeyed. You see, Jung believed that people wear masks to survive in society. That's normal. But when the mask becomes the entire identity, the person loses their psychological core. They become hollow. And to fill that emptiness, they seek validation from others, relentlessly. The charismatic manipulator is often highly intelligent, emotionally intuitive, and deeply insecure. They don't manipulate because they enjoy causing harm. They manipulate because they fear being truly seen and possibly rejected. So they mirror you, they flatter you, they move fast, emotionally, mentally, even romantically. They bypass natural boundaries to make you feel chosen, special, understood. But underneath that rush of connection is an agenda. What kind of agenda? It could be attention, influence, control, financial gain, emotional dependency. Whatever it is, it's about them, not you. You'll know you're dealing with a charismatic manipulator if they're too good to be true. Everything you've ever wanted, delivered instantly. They move quickly into intimacy, emotional or physical, before trust has been earned. They shift their energy when you stop giving them what they want. Suddenly cold, distant, critical, or absent. One moment you're their soulmate, the next you're disposable. That's not love, that's leverage. Jung warned that people who haven't integrated their shadow will seek power through personas. They'll charm others into submission, not because they are whole, but because they are fragmented and terrified of being ordinary. And yet, this makes them seductive, especially to those who are longing to be seen, loved, or rescued. So how do you protect yourself? Don't confuse chemistry with connection. Don't confuse attention with intimacy. And don't confuse mirroring with love. The manipulator feeds on projection. They want you to see what you want to see in them. But real connection isn't performance, it's vulnerability. Real people have flaws. They make mistakes. They don't glow with perfection 24/7. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." If you find yourself repeatedly drawn to people who shine too brightly, ask yourself, what part of me is still looking for magic instead of truth? Avoid the person who studies you to gain you. You deserve someone who simply shows up as themselves without needing to perform, manipulate, or seduce. Remember, not every spotlight is a sign of warmth. Sometimes it's just a trap. The emotional arsonist. Quiet chaos behind a calm face. They don't raise their voice. They don't throw things. In fact, they might seem calm, reasonable, even thoughtful. But after every interaction, you feel agitated, small, or guilty, and you don't know why. This is the work of what Carl Jung would describe as a person controlled by their unconscious emotional shadow. You've just met the emotional arsonist. These people don't explode, they ignite. Their weapons are subtler than insults or threats. They ask suggestive questions that plant doubt. They make harmless comments that cut deep. They offer compliments with a hidden edge. And when conflict arises, they play innocent. I was just being honest. You're too sensitive. I didn't mean it that way. But you feel the fire. They spark confusion, hurt, and self-doubt, while never appearing directly responsible. That's what makes them so dangerous. They cause chaos without ever looking chaotic. Jung taught that unacknowledged emotions, especially anger, envy, and fear, don't vanish. They seep into our behavior, often in unconscious, indirect ways. The emotional arsonist is someone who has never learned how to confront their pain, so they export it. They won't feel it, but you will. This kind of person thrives in environments where psychological clarity is lacking. In families, workplaces, and friend groups, they stir the pot just enough to create drama, then step back and observe. They often appear as the peacekeeper or truth teller, but in reality, they are the silent spark behind the flames. How do you know you're dealing with one? You constantly feel misunderstood, even when you explain yourself clearly. They say things that sound supportive on the surface but carry a toxic undercurrent. You find yourself defending your emotions over and over again. Conflict always seems to follow them, even if they're never in the center of it. And worst of all, they'll leave you feeling like you're the one who overreacted. Jung would say this behavior stems from deep disconnection from the self. The emotional arsonist is not in touch with their own unconscious motives. Their inner world is a landmine of resentment and insecurity, but they've never explored it. So it leaks out sideways, disguised as sarcasm, passive aggression, or fake concern. They often present as intelligent, thoughtful, or even spiritual. But intelligence without self-awareness is manipulation, and spirituality without shadow work is just ego in costume. So how do you protect yourself? You trust your body, your instincts. That knot in your stomach, that confusion after a conversation, that heaviness in your chest, those are signs. They're not weakness, they're warning signals from your unconscious. Jung believed that true maturity means holding space for your emotions and taking responsibility for them. Emotional arsonists do the opposite. They dodge accountability, create division, and weaponize confusion. And the longer you stay around them, the more your own clarity begins to fade. You doubt yourself. You walk on eggshells. You feel guilty for having boundaries. Don't play their game. Step away from the fire, even if it looks like a warm light, because once you burn long enough, you forget what calm feels like. Avoid the emotional arsonist, not because they're overtly cruel, but because they set fires in silence and then watch you burn. The ideological fanatic, when certainty destroys understanding. They speak with conviction. Their words are sharp, unshakable, and absolute. There's no space for doubt, nuance, or other perspectives. Everything they believe is correct. Everything you question is an attack. Carl Jung warned about people like this, not because they are wrong, but because they are incapable of seeing when they are. This is the ideological fanatic, a person who has confused belief with identity, and in doing so, has lost the ability to think critically. To be clear, having strong values or convictions is not the issue. In fact, Jung believed that a meaningful life often involves deep principles. The problem arises when a belief system becomes a rigid structure, a psychological fortress that protects the ego from reality. Fanaticism isn't always religious or political. It can take many forms: social justice, fitness, parenting, spirituality, even philosophy. What defines the fanatic isn't what they believe, it's how they believe. They don't discuss, they declare. They don't explore, they impose. They don't listen, they wait to retaliate. The ideological fanatic lives in a world of absolutes, good versus evil, us versus them. And this dualistic worldview isn't a sign of strength, it's a symptom of psychological fragility. It's easier to cling to a black and white ideology than it is to face the uncomfortable complexity of reality. Jung taught that growth happens in the tension of opposites. When you can hold conflicting ideas and explore the middle space, you evolve. The fanatic refuses that space. And because of that, they stop growing and try to stop everyone else from growing too. You'll recognize them by their need to dominate conversations, their inability to say, "I don't know," their suspicion of nuance, and above all, their hostility toward anyone who threatens their mental framework. Jung wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism." That's the thing. Ideology, when clung to too tightly, becomes a drug. It provides certainty in a world that offers none. It gives meaning to people who haven't developed an inner compass. And like all addictions, it eventually begins to destroy the person who relies on it. The fanatic projects their unconscious fears onto the world and then fights them. They don't fight for truth, they fight to preserve their identity, and that makes real dialogue impossible. So how do you protect yourself? Don't try to debate them. You can't reason with someone whose belief system is a psychological defense mechanism. Instead, recognize the signs. Do they frame disagreement as betrayal? Do they villainize entire groups of people? Do they shut down questions with slogans or moral superiority? If so, step back. There is no peace in a relationship with a fanatic, only pressure to conform. And over time, that pressure wears you down. You begin to censor yourself, agree to keep the peace, and question your own voice. Jung believed that freedom begins where fear ends. The fanatic lives in fear of being wrong, of being uncertain, of being alone with their thoughts. And until they face that fear, they'll try to control others instead. Avoid the ideological fanatic. Not because conviction is bad, but because real conviction doesn't need to silence others. It listens, it considers, and above all, it grows. The hollow vessel, the one who drains without saying a word. You spend time with them. Nothing seems obviously wrong. They don't insult you, argue, or provoke. They're even polite, maybe quiet, maybe a little distant. And yet, when you leave their presence, you feel exhausted, confused, as if something was taken from you. Carl Jung would have told you, pay close attention. You've encountered what he might describe as a person disconnected from their inner life, a hollow vessel. This is one of the most subtle but draining types of people you can meet. They don't explode like the emotional arsonist. They don't demand or manipulate like the victim or the fanatic. Instead, they absorb your energy, your light, your clarity, without even being fully aware of it. The hollow vessel is someone who has not developed a relationship with their own soul. They have no grounding in their inner world, no active values, no meaningful questions, no connection to purpose or pain. And when there is no inner fire, they subconsciously look for warmth elsewhere. Often they're drawn to emotionally intelligent, empathic, or creative individuals. Why? Because your light gives them form. But the relationship is one way. They listen without absorbing. They smile without resonance. They respond, but nothing touches the core because the core is vacant. Jung believed that every person must confront their inner world, what he called individuation. It's the process of becoming whole. But some avoid this process. They refuse the journey inward, choosing instead to live on the surface. Over time, they become hollow, and hollowness is hungry. You'll notice it in how they linger without contributing, how they gravitate toward meaningful conversations, but never really open up themselves. How they mimic emotional presence, but never meet you fully. It's not that they're bad, it's that they're disconnected. And disconnection breeds dependency. You may feel responsible for making the relationship work, for keeping conversations alive, for constantly carrying the emotional weight. But the truth is, you are filling a space they have abandoned within themselves. This dynamic is subtle but dangerous. Over time, it erodes your sense of self. You find yourself tired, irritated, emotionally blurred. You may even start feeling empty, mirroring their own unconscious state. Jung would remind you, what is not integrated becomes projected. The hollow vessel doesn't know what they're missing, but their unconscious does, and it seeks out energy, insight, and wholeness in others, never realizing it can only be found within. So what can you do? First, stop trying to rescue them. You cannot fill someone else's soul. That's sacred, solitary work. Second, pay attention to how you feel after spending time with them, not during, after. That's when your body tells the truth. Ask yourself, do I feel more or less like myself? Was there mutual exchange, or was I emotionally feeding them? Am I engaging out of love or obligation? The hollow vessel won't ask for too much. They may not ask for anything at all, but their presence creates a silent pull, and that pull can drain you if you're not grounded. Avoid the person who has abandoned their inner world, not because they're dangerous in the usual sense, but because their emptiness is a quiet force that consumes without violence. You deserve relationships that give as much as they take, that echo, resonate, and return. The hollow vessel offers none of that. They don't burn, they don't break. They just absorb until you vanish into their silence. The mask wearer, the one you'll never truly know. They're well-liked, polite, often successful. They know what to say, how to behave, when to smile. Their presence is smooth, composed, almost flawless. But the longer you know them, the more you realize something's missing, something important. Carl Jung would have told you, you're not speaking to a person, you're speaking to a mask. This is the mask wearer, someone who has lost all connection to their authentic self and now lives through performance. They are not who they are who they believe you want them to be. Jung called this the overdeveloped persona, a socially crafted identity designed to gain acceptance, admiration, or power. While we all wear masks to some degree, to navigate work, family, society, the mask wearer has become their persona. Their true self is buried, forgotten, or worse, never developed at all. They are agreeable, adaptable. They never seem to struggle, lose control, or express deep vulnerability. Everything is fine. But real human beings are not fine. They are complex, messy, alive. The mask wearer avoids this by reducing themselves to a curated version, safe, bland, and hollow. What makes them dangerous? They don't show up in relationships as a whole person. They show up as a projection, a role they've learned to play. And in doing so, they never really connect. They imitate connection, mirror it, but they can't feel it, and neither can you. You might start to feel like you're walking through fog. You talk, but it doesn't land. You share, but it doesn't move them. You're emotionally hungry in their presence, but you don't know why. It's not because they're cold. It's because there's no one truly there. Jung believed that the path to becoming a whole person requires facing not just your light, but also your darkness, your fears, your shame, your rage, your longing. The mask wearer avoids this work. Their entire identity is built around not being seen too deeply. How do you spot them? They never contradict, confront, or disagree, only quietly conform. They avoid emotionally intense conversations, or deflect with humor or detachment. They adapt quickly to each new environment, but seem to have no consistent inner voice. Their stories are always polished, their struggles distant, their vulnerability vague. Eventually, being close to them becomes tiring. You're not being met, you're being entertained, managed, or reflected. And if you ever challenge the mask, ask a deeper question, point out an inconsistency, they vanish, or they retaliate in subtle ways. Because you've broken the illusion, you've seen behind the curtain, and that makes you dangerous. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The mask wearer forfeits that privilege in exchange for comfort, but comfort without truth is just quiet suffering. They don't want connection, they want control, and they use charm, stability, or politeness to keep people close, but never in. So what do? You protect your energy. You value realness over perfection. You don't chase connection with someone who hides behind endless layers of performance. You realize, if someone refuses to show up as a full person, the relationship will always feel like half of one. Avoid the mask wearer, not because they're malicious, but because they are missing. And if you stay too long, you might start questioning your own reality. Remember, wholeness comes from depth, not appearance, from presence, not performance, from truth, not perfection. Don't trade your soul for shallow harmony. Don't mirror the mask, the closing reflection. So now you've met them, the 7 dangerous people Jung warned about. Not monsters, not villains, just unconscious people acting out unresolved patterns in increasingly harmful ways. The shadow denier, the eternal victim, the charismatic manipulator, the emotional arsonist, the ideological fanatic, the hollow vessel, the mask wearer. If you recognize them in others, take distance. If you recognize them in yourself, take responsibility. Jung's entire philosophy rests on this. You are not what has happened to you. You are what you choose to become. So choose wisely, who you follow, who you trust, who you let into the sacred space of your mind, and most importantly, who you become in the process.